All right. Should be good to go. I
Hello,
see us.
and welcome back to With Thunder's Applause podcast, where two friends get together and talk about current events and the ideas that'll shape our future. I am your host, Steve, here with my co-host, Zach. And today, I believe we're finishing our discussion on disasters. And as a very, very, very brief check-in, I think I finally figured it out. So I
figured what out?
Why, I kept losing internet service in the middle of recording these. Yeah, and so we just kind of harassed the cable company, and they came in and they said, you have too many spliced connections here, and this is old cable. And so they just ran brand new cable from the service box to the modem, and it seems like it might be working. I mean, we'll find out today, right?
I would not want to be the guy who had to crawl in your attic.
Oh no, they just
summer
ran
weather.
Outside.
Oh, okay.
And then he did come through the crawl space though, so it runs around the outside and then goes under the house and then pops up out of the corner of the room where we keep the modem.
Okay.
Keep it centrally located, and then I just have a network cable that comes from the living room through the wall to my PC.
Nice. Yeah. I won this lovely shirt at a trivia contest. Nice. At the Tioga Sequoia Brewing Company, not spawned, but still a wonderful local brewing company that does a whole lot of activities. Super fun.
So, real quick question before we talk about natural disasters, let's talk about the disaster that is some trivia. Because I remember playing trivia at Buffalo Wild Wings or something with you, and we were pretty toasty. I was really upset because they had an entire fucking category of Frozen.
That's when my mom was there too.
Right, your mom was there, and I think we were out with another friend.
Yeah,
it was Disney is I could see being a category in trivia, right? Because then there's a lot of stuff to draw from.
Exactly.
Right. But when you just say Frozen, you have these adult men who apparently were really into Disney. Took the lead from us, and we had dominated on really fucking hard questions species of freshwater fish. We don't know that. We're just kind of making educated guesses, which is why trivia can be really fun sometimes in group trivia or whatever. And then it's the category is Frozen, and then they're like, oh, we got all these because that's our favorite movie.
Yeah,
for
reference, this was so long ago, I don't think there was a Frozen 2 yet.
That's true. So that you mean it would be a legitimate category if it was both Frozen movies?
Yes, exactly.
Disney is a category, or animated feature films or something.
People fucking love that movie. People love that damn movie. I don't get it.
I don't understand it, man. But whatever. To each
it was all right.
Their own.
Yeah. I have seen them both. Full disclosure. They were all right.
I have not, but both my kids have. So obviously.
Yeah. And Brendan Urie is amazing, but he doesn't actually do any vocals in the movie. He just did it for the soundtrack, and I think he did the composing for the movie too.
Oh,
he's the Panic at the Disco.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Amazing.
All right, great. Well, we're going to talk about natural disasters. Sorry.
Yes, no, it's okay. Yes, we are. We're going to start off talking about what different types of waves there are with earthquakes and how they cause so much damage.
Excellent. Seismic waves.
Yes, seismic waves. Correct.
There are two broad classes of seismic waves: body waves and surface waves. Body waves travel within the body of Earth. They include P, or primary waves, and S, or secondary waves. P waves cause the ground to compress and expand, that is, to move back and forth, in the direction of travel. They are called primary waves because they are the first type of wave to arrive at seismic recording stations. P waves can travel through solids, liquids, and even gases. S waves shake the ground in a shearing or crosswise motion that is perpendicular to the direction of travel. These are the shake waves that move the ground up and down or from side to side. S waves are called secondary waves because they always arrive after P waves at seismic recording stations. Unlike P waves, S waves can travel only through solid materials. After both P and S waves have moved through the body of Earth, They are followed by surface waves, which travel along Earth's surface. Surface waves travel only through solid media. They are slower moving than body waves, but are much larger and therefore more destructive. The two types of surface waves are named love waves and Rayleigh waves after the scientists who identified them. Love waves have a horizontal motion that moves the surface from side to side perpendicular to the direction the wave is traveling. Of the two surface waves, love waves move faster. Rayleigh waves cause the ground to shake in an elliptical pattern. This motion is similar to that observed in ocean waves. Of all the seismic waves, Rayleigh waves spread out the most, giving them a long duration on seismograph recordings.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we can educate people on how the Earth moves.
It undulates sometimes.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like different kind of like the strikes. I think in our last one, strike slip fault of San Andreas.
Right.
It's gonna act differently than a subduction plate.
Right, and that's where the Cascadia fault is subduction. San Andreas is the strike slip. Yeah. And the subduction ones are the crazy ones because basically the plate just continues for a very long time diving under, still attached, and then at some point it just snaps off, and then as there's no longer any weight holding it down, so it tries to eat up that.
And what's interesting is off of a geographic point called Cape Mendocino. Mm-hmm. It's called the Mendocino Triple Junction, and it's probably the most relevant point of reference for geologic hazards on the West Coast easily, right. Because that's the terminus. That's basically where several plates meet, Triple Junction,
right,
and that's the beginning of the San Andreas fault, and also like the south end of the Cascadia subduction.
Yeah, I believe that's the Juan de Fuca.
Yeah, in the little remnant plate, there's a plate that's almost completely consumed that we don't have it'll be another several tens of millions of years before it's gone, but like it's not really a plate in the proper sense where it's large. It's just like a little fragment.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's interesting too, because like there's a lot of very small earthquakes measured in that area, but none of them are really all that big. They have a couple larger quakes in the northwest of California. But generally speaking, they have a lot of like little, like really deep, like 4.0s and stuff. And the deeper it is, generally the less destructive they are, because the shaking is not so close to the surface, right? Whereas the Northridge and Loma Prieta and stuff, that's all like happening in the upper part of Earth.
Yeah, like really, really close to the surface.
Mm-hmm. And so it's way more violent.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, simple explanation of the waves tends to be that the S waves and the surface waves are the most destructive ones, and so like when an earthquake first happens, you get notified that it's going to get worse, basically. Because you get those initial P waves that are fast travel, and then you're going to get those S waves a little later, and then lastly you're going to get those surface waves, and they're the ones that are going to do the billions of dollars of damage in infrastructure.
Yeah, and we'll get a little bit more into potentialities, and then how it kind of fits into this broader conversation we're having about resiliency and anti-fascism, etc. I think we're going to talk a little bit about the Cascadia subduction zone.
Yeah, I got some stuff.
Because that's like a civilization ending kind of thing, even if it would just be like a regional disaster. Like, again, we'll talk a little bit more in a minute, but like these things have wide-ranging consequences.
Absolutely.
Globally, especially if it's a catastrophe that affects, tens, if not hundreds of millions of people, and like ports and, manufacturing centers and, research and development facilities and all this other sunk energy, right? Like in a complex society, we're sinking tons of energy into all of this infrastructure for maintaining industrial civilization, and nature just does what nature does.
Right. Yeah.
And some of that might be fucking massive, just land disappearing in tsunamis. So let's talk about that now.
That's what gets me too, is like, man, so much of the integrated circuit infrastructure is over in Eastern Asia, like right along where all these ring of fire faults are and all that stuff. So it's like tsunamis, earthquakes, monsoons, and stuff like that. And it's like, probably want to, if you want to continue with your advanced a society that's based upon, computer chips, you might want to diversify a little bit, get in some of the less tectonically active areas.
Right. And I mean, then there's a reason, right, that people are concentrated there, access to ocean and fisheries and freshwater resources, rivers and stuff. The humans settle in places to access resources. But you bring up a good point that, like, obviously, like, many people saw coming, but then somehow, like, governments and individuals alike were kind of blindsided by, like, COVID, like, completely destroying some supply chains, or rather disrupting them, right? Like, and making them not function because, like, the drive for capitalist efficiency makes us less resilient and more vulnerable to changes. Like you said, microprocessing. Okay, there's a bad earthquake. Fuck, there's a revolution or even just like widespread social unrest where workers can't get to the factories to build these things.
Right.
Like, there's all manner of disasters or kind of means of disruption that would just globally prevent you from getting what you need. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, no, you bring up a great point though, because it's not even natural disasters, man-made, disasters like invasions and, things like that. Like, we just had, Nancy Pelosi go to Taiwan. Taiwan makes a massive amount of
I wanted to do next week on Taiwan. I just hadn't talked to you about it. Yeah.
We'll get there. Okay, cool. We're on the same page. Yeah. Like that place makes a massive number of computer chips, and like, I can almost assure you that if there's like an actual military invasion, some of that infrastructure is going to get, beat up. Like, if nothing else, I would think that, if the Taiwanese people were like, oh, we're going to lose our shit, let's blow it up ourselves. Let's at least set China back or something like that. I wouldn't put it past people to just be like, well, if you're going to take us over, you're not going to get any of our good shit.
It's like burning your own bridges as you retreat, like an
burning the crops, like Russia did during the World Wars. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's not just natural. There's a lot of man-made stupid shit that we like to do.
Oh yeah, exactly. Or computer systems that are vulnerable to cyber attack or whatever.
Oh my God. Yeah. Like all the pipelines that get shut down due to like ransomware and whatnot. It's like, we knew that was coming. We probably should have done something about that. Too late now.
We should just pay a fucking guy to turn a valve.
I don't know. That sounds like a lot of money.
The chain link around it. And you just need a dude with a fucking key. It's mechanical. It's a technology that's thousands of years old.
Millions.
And we're like, let's have computers do it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. So we got our next clip. This one's from PBS Nova. Over there. Yeah, this is talking about Cascadia directly.
Fair use.
Yeah. Don't come after us. We love you.
The biggest earthquakes in the world are along subduction zone boundaries, and those are places where one tectonic plate is diving down underneath another tectonic plate. The largest earthquake that's happened in the US that we're aware of was along the Cascadia subduction zone, where the Juan de Fuca plate is diving down underneath the North American plate. And we can get really big earthquakes there because the plate that's going down is usually oceanic crust, which is cold and dense. That means it can break. So if you think about baking chocolate chip cookies, when you pull the cookies right out of the oven, they bend and they're nice and gooey. but once they've gotten to be cold, they break. So that cold, dense crust that's going down can break for a much longer time. So we get bigger earthquakes in those particular places.
The same.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Is they literally will just, it builds up, snaps, and then all that weight that was pulling down on the oceanic crust is relieved, and it snaps back up, and that's when you get, tsunamis, massive earthquakes along the shore. You can see in the picture, you can see there's a whole column of water, of course, that's above the continental crust that just gets flung upward. It's terribly catastrophic, and I don't think we think about it often enough. Just how at the mercy of the earth we are.
Right. And right. So and that's the hubris, right? Because
Right.
And I'm not sure if this clip gets to it, but if you want to there's a lot of great resources specifically on the Cascadia subduction zone, and some mega earthquake tsunami that the science says is on a 300-year cycle, which is,
yes.
And the last time was about 300 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I included we're not going to watch the clip, but I included in the notes the geographics one with Simon Whistler where he goes over it. Yeah, it's a great video.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, there's other videos that'll go over it, but the indigenous people fucking had this story when white settlers came to the area, right?
Yeah.
Because it was in their recent history, several generations, but we're only talking 150 years.
Right.
And it destroyed villages and probably altered landscapes in such a way to where we used to go there to collect shellfish and now we can't because it's fucking covered in mud, right? It's no longer a part of the estuary.
All right.
And so their whole landscape and their resource, their knowledge of where resources were and stuff was just wiped away, and they had to recreate it in recent memory, and they told stories mythology around it.
Right.
And so we could have been oh shit, this is crazy. I think elsewhere in this clip or another one, they talk
we'll
about
get to it. Yeah.
First people come to it and they're or first white people come and look and they're how did this happen? So they knew, or at least had a suspicion, and there were stories that the indigenous folks were telling about this being a really fucking bad place to build a city, but instead it's one of the most important cities in the modern United States. I mean, tech, right? Microsoft and Amazon and all of that shit is there. Plus aerospace, during World War II, U.S. government built a bunch of aerospace facilities and important military installations in the region. It's fucking crazy. Anyway,
we can continue.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Tectonic activity that caused the earthquakes resulted in another destructive event, a tsunami.
You have one plate diving down beneath another. This section gets locked and it pushes this part up. When the fault ruptures, when the amount of stress overcomes the friction, it bounces back, which lifts up the water above it and causes that water to flow out in all directions. And that water flowing out in all directions is the tsunami.
Clues about the earthquake and tsunami.
And at that point, you done, son.
Yeah, it's a real hazard. If you go, I mean, you've been up to Humboldt recently, I think too. But if you're on the highway that wraps around the Humboldt Bay there between Eureka and Arcata, there's tsunami fucking warnings and shit, and you just have to recognize that it's a reality, and hopefully that they have an effective warning system in place, right?
I mean, who listens to the radio anymore? So it's not like your radio is going to get in. My Pandora is not going to get interrupted with bang, bang, bang.
No, but they have gotten very, very effective with text messaging. I would, when I got COVID a number of months back, I did a PCR test, went to drive through at the drugstore or whatever, and then the county texted me.
Oh,
and we get wildfire evacuations or red flag warnings when the winds are high and it's really hot and really dry, because those are most dangerous times for a fire to start and get away.
Yeah.
So you'll just get a text now that's and you didn't fucking sign up for it. The government knows your phone number.
It's maybe don't barbecue right now. You're all right.
Yeah, exactly. Or just be aware of the fact that the conditions are right to where if a fire started in your area and you happen to be in the wrong place, like it'll happen real fast.
Yeah.
Campfire was super fucking fast. And that fits into the discussion of disasters, human and natural disasters, because that was, obviously a little bit of both and very complex issue. But the text message systems are pretty effective now, and most people have a phone. I think some municipalities, especially in and around rivers, like some counties rather, not municipalities, but counties, will have emergency call lists for like areas that are super prone to flooding. And then they'll, during like a big storm, they have like an incident team that kind of like monitors stuff. And if they get a call saying like, hey, forecast for the river to rise 8 feet, then they have like an automated system that calls people and just like has a voice recording or whatever.
Oh, nice.
It's like, hey, forecast flooding in your area, be prepared to evacuate. Just so people aren't like, oh God, what do I do? Kind of like hurricane warnings, right? They know they're coming.
Yeah.
And if people are ill prepared, that's a social disaster, not a natural disaster. That's poverty, and that's racism and all other manner of social ills. That leaves people trapped like in a city of like New Orleans.
If we had flooding here, we'd be fucked. Like the drainage is not great. Like even when it's just like heavy rain, which admittedly never fucking happens.
Right.
But even with heavy rain, the one just right, like it all drains into one that's right around the corner. That thing clogs up at a moment's notice. I think it's all the raccoons getting drowned. But yeah, this whole area, there is an area nearby called, I think it's the Old Fig Garden area. And basically it's a bunch of old rich people. The houses were all made before like sewage lines were like a big thing out in the area. And so like it puddles up all the time when it rains. And if there was a heavy rain, that whole area would just be inundated.
Well, most of the again, coming back to that point about where humans settle and why, right?
Yeah.
Like we settle at ecotones, right? Like Chico's between like the fertile valley and the foothills where there's farmland here and trees there, right? Trees and game, good place to put and creeks, water, right? Water supply, a good place to put a city. Most of the valley where people are settled, like used to be riparian areas, and you wouldn't fucking know it because we just like cut the trees down and pave it.
Covered it over, yeah.
Yeah, and then the paving makes it even fucking worse because now there's less soil to take on and hold water.
Right.
So we could talk a lot about flooding. In fact, we should have talked about fire and flood before earthquake, since where we live, like they're a significant threat to the region. But like, I'm not worried about like my house falling down on me so much.
Yeah, well, like right now, where I live, at least, Yosemite is on fire, but like it would take a forest fire like that is not going to affect this area just because there's massive amounts of big open plains surrounding the city, and so it's not going to make that jump.
No,
and
but the smoke
any fire that happens, well, it's a huge problem. Any fire that happens here is going to be caused probably by a man-made thing,
like structure fire,
barbecues or something like that. Structure fire like that could spread.
Camps.
Yeah, I mean, that could spread, but yeah, it's not going to be like a forest fire issue. Where you are is a little bit more open.
Yeah, actually, the campfire did burn right up to the edge of the city, where the city wants to build like 300-acre housing development. And you're like, it literally just fucking burned 3 years ago, and you want to put houses there?
Yeah.
Like, I guess they're like, oh well, we'll just pave it over, and then there's not a lot of
trees,
not
to
a lot
catch
of
fire, grass. Yeah. Yeah, they keep extending ever northward over in that area. Anywho. Yeah,
exactly.
It's bad.
Let's finish watching this clip about tsunamis.
Yeah, we're going to continue with Nova.
Oral histories of the event suggest that many died in the tsunami. And Heritage and Cultural Director of the Shoalwater Bay Tribe, Earl Davis, explains how additional clues about life after this earthquake and tsunami were pieced together.
The archaeological record basically suggests that tsunami came, laid down a bunch of sand, and then people went back to kind of normal life. You can see it right in the soil. There's a layer of just sterile sand, and then there's an occupation layer immediately after. It doesn't appear like there was a huge rebuilding time for us back then.
For communities along the coast at sea level, an earthquake and tsunami event could have a much bigger impact today than it did in 1700.
Our lifestyle now is largely predicated on the modern, Western, colonialized type lifestyle of putting in a cement foundation and running all these utilities and building a big, expensive infrastructure that is supposed to be there for 200-300 years. Whereas traditionally speaking, we put some poles in the ground, covered them in planks, lived there for half the year, then packed up all the planks and went to where we had another house, maybe up to 100 miles away, to better fishing grounds or better grounds for avoiding harsher weather.
And the threat of another event like this is very real.
The geologic record tells us that there are large earthquakes along that boundary about every 300 to 500 years.
Which means we could be getting close to another big one.
Yeah, and so that was definitely the whole, it happened in about 1700. It seems to happen, via the geologic record about every 250 to 350 years, and we're approaching that 350 mark really, really rapidly. So watch out, y'all. Maybe move away from the West Coast.
I mean, there's not really a place to go that's safe. I understand that, but
there's danger everywhere.
So, like, it's funny because we're talking about natural disasters and shit, and social disasters too, right? Yeah. And like we've talked about the homelessness issue before, and one of the things that came up was like this insane idea of what is legitimately housing and what is not. And what that individual said in the video is exactly where my thinking is. It's like, so these disasters like earthquakes and tsunamis or even wildfires and stuff are a big fucking deal because we sink so many resources into things that we don't need to sink resources into.
Right.
Like, we could shelter ourselves in much less expensive ways and much more transient, for lack of a better term, or temporary, right? Mm-hmm. And then we wouldn't, if we lost our housing, be like, fuck, that sucks. I guess for the next month and a half, I'm building a new house. Right. But you wouldn't have, ginormous bureaucracies, and it wouldn't be $40, $50, $60, $80,000 in fucking permit fees or any of this other shit. We'd just be allowed to shelter ourselves instead of having a system that would prefer people unsheltered than to just having whatever social convention says is substandard.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, if the Amish can throw up a house in a couple of days without any heavy machinery, it seems like we should be able to do that as well.
Yeah. I mean, they use like modern fasteners and stuff. The Amish aren't like traditionalists or whatever. But yeah, they build, and that's part of their ritual, right? Like, that's when a man and I don't know much about the Amish, but I think it's part of the ritual where, like, when a man and a woman get married, like, one of the first things they do is like the community comes together and helps them build a house because it's part of starting a family, right? Like,
yeah, well, it's basically investing in your own community, and it's saying that housing is a right. So like this backwards group, has things, more forward than the rest of us.
Zach is saying the Amish woke as fuck.
The Amish woke as fuck. Yeah.
All right, man. What else do we got on this? So anyway, catastrophic disaster. And here's a point I did want to make, though.
Yeah.
So like a lot of this stuff, and it's funny because like by virtue of like looking things up like this, now I'm going to start getting all these like YouTube ads for like Patriot Food Bucket or whatever. It's like a 2-month supply of food, and we give you seeds so you can grow a garden, like prepper shit, like, because people are like, oh god, this is gonna happen, I need to prep. And what really the preparations you need to make is have a go bag, right? Yeah. And you need to be able to be mobile, and that means a go bag, right?
Yeah.
And that's important for anybody in earthquake zones or in fire zones. We honestly don't have that yet. We're kind of in the process of like figuring out exactly how to approach that. A generator would be nice, like a gas generator or whatever. If you're going to be at home, expect the grid to go down.
Yeah.
and all these things, but really like your own resiliency, like it depends on your preparation. But it's kind of weird how a lot of this stuff, like, oh, Yellowstone super volcano, like it just kind of like almost feeds like an industry of people who are fucking paranoid.
Well, and there's nothing you can do about that one. So it's like,
or any of these. There's
well,
nothing you can do.
Well, I mean, the go bag works for, a local, eruption, or, a local earthquake or tsunami. But like, the super volcano goes off, we're all just dead. It's cool. Have some fun.
Don't know much about it. I thought it was kind of like just a thing.
It's basically the last time it went off, it filled the Midwest with basalt, threw shit tons of ash and gas into the air, and like killed a bunch of life. Yeah, I'm not saying that, like humanity's going away, but like much of America would go away probably.
Well, but, yeah, like, and I mean,
nothing you can do about that.
We can't handle fucking drought in a state that is highly productive agriculturally, but like also has invested massive social resources in delivering virtually free water to the farmers. Yeah. Most of which are corporate farms, by the way. The whole like, oh, we need water and we're just a small farmer. Most of that is just fucking marketing.
What's that fuck's name in Sacramento? LaMalfa. Yeah, love that guy. Yeah, he's got a family farm with like 12 different parcels spread out amongst all of his spawn.
Not even. It's like owned by a fucking holding company at this point, and then they just like other people. They pay other people to farm it.
Yeah. But hey, he wears a cowboy hat and he wears jeans, so he's authentic and unique.
He's one of us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's his fucking slogan.
I know. It's terrible.
Anyway, we're not talking about local politics. Let's talk about this shit. So I do have an issue with, have an issue with kind of this knowledge being exploited to make people fearful. And then it's always like you hear from like, people who I used to call friends being like, oh, we got to fucking get guns because if there was like a big earthquake, all these fucking whatever Marauders. They're using as a code word for black person, right? Like all these thugs or all these, gangsters or whatever are going to flood out of Oakland, like into the hills around Auburn looking for fucking what, bro? Like if Hurricane Katrina is any fucking example, it wasn't fucking pretty, don't get me wrong, but they all like went to evac centers.
Yeah. Like and then tried to get back home.
Like the middle of the fucking foothills to somebody's property that's like, 10 miles outside of the like city to like go house to house and rob people. Like,
no, for the most part, they just wanted to get back into their homes. They wanted to rebuild. They didn't want to relocate or anything like that. They knew there was a great chance it would happen again, but they're like, this is my home. And as a human, I'm attached to that. So I'm going to live in a place that's prone to flooding.
And a neighborhood. They're attached to the neighborhood and they just live there for generations. And people, it's just funny that a lot of this stuff gets exploited to kind of feed into these fascist narratives because like instability is inevitable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, but rather than just having an honest conversation and preparing for our resiliency, it instead then becomes like, if this happens, then there's going to be all these other bad things that happen socially.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really just a way to justify like your xenophobia, I guess. Like, I don't know. In the conversations I've had, it seems like that. When I told somebody I was having a conversation with them and said I was a left-wing prepper. Mm-hmm. Like, and they thought I was fucking weird because preppers are like crazy fucking fashy people. And I'm like,
right.
No, dude, you just like, it's preparing for your own resilience, man.
Yeah,
like,
I want to be ready for inevitabilities.
Yeah. The fact that like, if like the grocery store was empty, like I could go, like I know 6 different weeds that are growing in my yard right now that I could fucking eat. Mm-hmm. Just by that knowledge, like I already bought myself an extra day or two on like my neighbors.
Right.
And then once they die, I'll eat them.
Yes, of course. You want some bicep? No.
No. All right, let's watch another part of the clip.
Yeah.
The Shoalwater Bay Tribe applied for and received federal funding to construct a tsunami evacuation tower on their reservation, a structure that could protect the most vulnerable populations by providing quick access to higher ground.
the driving force behind the tsunami tower, is giving a place down there a fighting chance of getting up above that wave.
When completed, the tsunami tower will be only the second in the country. However, other indigenous communities that the US government has failed to recognize don't have access to the same federal resources, like the Chinook Indian Nation that Tony Johnson's a member of.
We have the great benefit of continuing to reside on our Aboriginal lands, and we have the horrible reality of not being truly federally recognized as an Indian community. And with that federal recognition comes so much of the support that we need. You know, we have a goal, or at least an initial thought, of building 2 tsunami evacuation towers, but don't have access to the resources that our federally recognized neighbors have. I don't think it is very likely that anybody will leave the village after a 9-point earthquake. There's a bridge to the landform that most folks live on, and I can't imagine that bridge surviving that earthquake. So it really will be that folks on the island itself are going to either be high enough or not.
So I have 3 quick points.
Yeah.
Point number 1. Well, one of the points is not quick. Point number 1, it's appropriate that the autoplay, or suggestion or whatever,
The drought.
surviving drought, California's droughts lead to other disasters. It's like, yes, they do.
Mm-hmm.
Another point is that that's a whole conversation in and of itself that I'm not the expert on. I have several friends that actively work, in indigenous communities, and that is like a real fucking serious problem. I wasn't aware. Like, I have a buddy who's pretty close with the Winnemem Wintu. They're north, and they just finished one of their big annual ceremonies for to draw attention to salmon and attempt to get government resources going towards protecting and or repairing salmon habitat, right? And they're not fucking federally recognized.
Mm-hmm.
So they have territorial identity, right? And they have ceremonies attached to that space, and they're actively doing the work of advocating for their cultural resources like salmon,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the federal government's like, nah. And then the interesting thing is that the recognized tribes now, even though you would think, oh, they're all indigenous Americans, they should all have a kind of shared objective and obviously different culturally, but kind of a shared identity as an American Indian or whatever. But they don't. Instead, they're really hyper competitive because they're like, if they get federal recognition, then they get to build a fucking casino that will compete with my casino. And so the casinos was like, oh, it's going to give money to all these native tribes. No, it didn't. It gave it to some native tribes and put them in the bourgeois class, right? And gave them an interest aligned with the colonizers so that they could help keep the other ones in line. It's a fucking insane system, dude. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah. That video, the very end, when he talked about the one bridge out of the area, it's like, yeah, that is the case in a lot of places. And
Cohasset.
Yeah.
That place is a fucking fire trap, and there's one windy ass 2-lane road that comes down.
Oh yeah.
There's dirt roads that go further deeper into the mountain. But if you're trying to get to a city,
it dead end. Yeah, it pretty much goes up and dead ends in the mountains. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I'm thinking, I wish I could remember what the city was, but it's somewhere up in, I think, Oregon or Washington, and they're like, oh yeah, there's one bridge that leads out to this relatively big island that is pretty densely populated, and that bridge has had structural issues in the past, and it basically just trapped people, and they had to get supplies boated in and stuff like that. And so those single point failures are a big thing to take into account, and so many places have those single point failures. built in.
They do. Yeah. Forest Hill, technically, you could do like a place I grew up called Forest Hill here in Northern California. There's technically a bridge at the bottom. So there's like a windy mountain road. You can cross like the original bridge, but they built like another big bridge. So it's a lot faster to get to town. And yeah, and like if that bridge went down, like people wouldn't probably leave Forest Hill very often, because like it would take a 20-minute drive and make it like a 45-minute drive. And then also if you put traffic on it, like it might be an hour and 30 minutes. But yeah, and that's the reality. And so there's this point that they should have access to fucking resources. But also I've said the same thing. I told my county supervisor at one point, I was like, for places like Cohasset, for places like Paradise or Forest Ranch, or all of these communities in and around the foothills where like the fires can burn through really quickly, if you have like an elderly care facility, or you have like a mobile home park that caters to 55 plus or whatever, like the county should use some of the money, the blood money that they got from the utility company, because they got like, I think, a couple $100 million, which is a lot for a fairly small county government.
Right.
And install or help fund fire bunkers, because they've implemented those in Australia in some places, I think, for bushfires. But they're basically like, it's a bunker, so you go underground and like, and it's only if you can't like get evacuated in advance. If a fire's moving really quickly, like within a handful of minutes, you can get there and like with whatever you can carry, right? So you lose your house and your car and everything else that's above, but your life is safe, right?
Right.
And so like these tsunami towers, we could just say, okay, it will cost too much energy and too many societal resources to outright prevent this, which would be to basically build a park around the mountain community, and then have fucking tanks full of water on pressure systems, and have like be able to turn that on when there's a fire and just like wet everything, right?
Right.
Not practical economically, or in terms of private property rights. Like there isn't just a uniform piece of private property surrounding every communities, right?
I could just see that thing going off like accidentally.
Right. But what you can do is say, oh, there's a developer that wants to put in a little strip mall here. Well, one of the conditions for you putting the strip mall there is it would just be like nuke bunkers. You know how they have the little sign that says, oh, there's a fucking nuclear fallout shelter?
Yeah.
And like they were just, if shit hit the fan, people like could be like, oh shit, let's go there. And then it also gives you a point to direct resources, right? So like after whatever it's over and people are coming through, cops or whatever, to rescue people, firefighters and shit, they know where they can go check, right? To pull people out. And you could just require the developer, you want to build that strip mall, you're required to put in a fire bunker that can fit 40 people.
Yeah.
And then the developer up the street wants one, he gets 40 people.
Yeah.
And then that way, by the time you're done, you can have most everybody should be able to evacuate, right? But in the case where someone's like, oh shit, my fucking car is in the shop, like they can run a half mile up to the bunker. What's that?
Yeah. Oh, most of the towns that are that remote are relatively small, like, a couple thousand people at most.
Yeah, so, and you're not talking about sheltering everybody, but giving people who don't have the option of getting out someplace to go. In the campfire,
just long.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Just long enough for the fire to burn by.
Yep, that's all it is. It's just to protect you from the heat and the smoke while it burns through.
Exactly. You were saying about the campfire, though?
No, yeah, the sheriff didn't know what to fucking do, and the fire had blocked the road and shit. So they just like literally like, I think the fire department passed out like those little foil fire blankets.
Oh my god!
And they also had like blankets from their houses that they like got drenched in water.
Yeah.
And they just had them lay down in the middle of a parking lot. Because then at least the fire's not coming right up to you, and you're really just protecting yourself from like falling embers and ash and smoke.
Yeah, and smoke.
But they just had them fucking like get covered with a fucking weight blanket in the middle,
like prone on the ground,
exploding and shit. Holy shit!
Our buddy got out of there with like his truck, his dog, his computer, and some clothes.
Yeah,
like that was it. He lost everything else.
my boss at the time, my immediate supervisor, his animals were inside the house, and he lost those. He lost his classic car that he was rebuilding, and his motorcycle, and lost all their dogs. He had just won at a VFW rally. He had just won a old World War II era like rifle. So like a vintage or antique rifle, and like a bunch of other firearms, and just like lost everything, just fucking all of it. And he got back to town with enough time to get his kid.
God,
and pick his kid up from the high school. Yeah, and that's it.
That was it. Well, it wasn't that bad in the Philippines.
Okay.
Which
we were going to talk about that because that was kind of the current event that brought it together.
Well, yeah. You mentioned you had a friend, so I figured, hey, let's do it.
We reached Benguet town a day after the powerful quake. Damaged buildings were already evacuated. Cracks can be seen on roads. And persisting aftershocks further threaten the already distressed victims. And for Eric and his family, it's safety first, especially after seeing their dream house crumble right before their eyes.
Bigla-bigla na lang nag-shake na siya. Tapos pinakiramdaman ko muna, tapos bigla na lang tuloy-tuloy na, tapos ang lakas na ng shake niya, kaya binuhat ko na yung baby ko. Tumakbo na kami.
Just like most of the families in Benguet, Eric and his kin are now camping outside the ruins of their dream house.
Dream house talaga namin tong mag-partner, ma'am, kasi matagal na to, pinag-ipunan pa namin. Sobrang nanghihinayang talaga kami kasi pagod at pawis ang pinuhunan namin dito, tapos sa isang iglap lang ganun yung mangyayari.
Nanay Eliza also lost her house to the quake. The ground level of their 3-story home got crushed, burying some of their vehicles.
Nanlulumo, parang nawalan din ng lakas na ganyan, pero pasalamat ako dahil ligtas ho kami kahit ganyan ang nangyari.
I like her shirt.
Sana tulungan ho kami, marami ho kami na ganito ang nangyari sa sakunang ito dahil kaya lang gusto ko sana pantay-pantay na maabot namin kung ano man ang dapat na tulong ang may bibigay sa amin.
In the epicenter of the earthquake, the town of Lagangilang, we saw scores of people living in makeshift shelters.
I love my congressman. That's what her shirt said. I heart my congressman.
18-year-old Rainer says most of the residents prefer to stay outdoors amid the rain after what happened to their houses.
They're just afraid to be inside.
Yeah. I mean, it's
like that shit almost killed me, man. Fuck that. I'll sleep outside.
It's got to be PTSD right there,
That's absolutely 100% what it is.
Yeah.
I really wanted to draw attention to that statement she made, like where I hope that the redistribution is fair.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, the president of the Philippines is not the greatest person in the world.
No, I think he was running for No, the current president. You're right, and then the guy running is even worse. I think, right?
I think they had the election recently, and the bad guy won.
Okay.
It was his dad used to be the president or something like that. And he was horrible. They extracted. And now he's like, oh, I won't do that.
I won't do that.
Her statement, I feel weak.
I feel weak. Yeah, that's very powerful because that's just like she's saying, I don't feel like I have any control over the situation because you don't have control.
Fucking earthquake.
That's I think that's why these kinds of things like stir up those kinds of like, oh well, to be prepared for an earthquake, I gotta get my guns, right? Like,
what you can do? Shoot the earth?
No, it's just to protect yourself from like some kind of enemy that you're perceiving would take advantage of a disaster like that.
Yeah,
and it's because like even the individual that's like, give me my fucking guns and my pantry full of canned goods, like it still feels weak in the face of those kinds of things.
I think you can see a lot into like how people think from their fears. And so like, when someone's like, oh, I'm afraid of looting, blah, blah, it's like, because that's what you would do.
Right.
in the same situation. And so you fear yourself because in your mind, you would do anything. And so you imagine everyone else would do anything. And it's like,
And also,
you can see here, that's not the case. You know, people are like, coming together and, working to like live basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I like the point you made about redistribution, because like when we think of like economic disasters, like we knew it became abundantly clear that the banks had predatory practices and destroyed people's lives. And instead of holding them accountable, we left all those people out to dry and then gave the banks a bunch of money so that they could start consolidating more and more and more real estate, and driving up prices, right? Like, so they created the housing disaster and they got fabulously rich. And so when you see something like this, of course, like Paradise, another example. Fucking PG&E had to pay out some millions of dollars. The county will get some. Most of that will go to some fucking consultant, right? Like, to plan something and spend fucking $10 million on someone to draft a report that, like, me and my friends were drafting reports similar to that on housing and stuff like that and just handing it to them. And it took us like 3 weeks and we didn't get paid no fucking $250,000 to do it, right? We just did it because we know how to do it and it should be done. But anyway, like, the companies that got the FEMA contracts are all these, like, they're basically like ambulance chasers, and they exist and they come and they get the big federal contracts because they have relationships and contacts in this. They get the contract for something like cleaning up afterwards, way over charges. They do really bad work and or incomplete work, because once they get paid, they don't give a fuck and there's no accountability. And it didn't do anything. All of these people now just face like 25% rent increases like in a day. Like, and there was no support for them. Like, we could have easily been like, no, you have to hire, like, if you get a contract, you have to hire workers from within 50 miles of the place. Right. And then that at least would have provided like jobs for some of the people that are now like, or better jobs for people who were facing, a 25% rent hike because so many housing units were lost and people are fucking greedy. Like, but they didn't, because it's a fucking grift. And that was my point, is that like homeowners, if you didn't have insurance, like, and even if you did have insurance, your insurance company's constantly trying to figure out how not to pay you, because that's how they make money, right? And then all this money flows into, fixing it and making it right or whatever. And it all goes to fucking rich companies and rich individuals, right? And like all the fucking homeowners are like, what the fuck? What do I do? Like, I can't restart my life. I'm like some retirees, like 65, 70 or something, made it out alive or whatever, and is now looking at like, well, can't start over because I'm too fucking old. And so they're like, they're not gonna buy another house, or they don't have kids, or they don't access this kind of relief, And so that was just an interesting point she made about knowing that it's fucking corrupt and that could happen, and that the legislature could be like the congressman that they love, right? Could pass a bill giving relief to that area, and then it just gets fucking taken by some grifter, right? Some contractor that
from outside the area
gets paid government money and doesn't deliver.
And even if they do deliver, they're still extracting the wealth from the region because they're not based in that area. So,
right, exactly.
So something I noticed watching the houses and whatnot was it looked like it was like a lot of like cinder block, straight up concrete, construction. I didn't see rebar.
I saw rebar in one of the cross columns. But still, the engineering standards might not have been to that. I don't know much about building in the Philippines, but I imagine
a very, very little like wood, very little what we here would, or dictate just basically the ability for the house to sway during an earthquake. And so it looked like it was all very rigid material, and just like earthquake comes in, that's all getting destroyed and cracked and whatnot. And so all those houses, their dream houses and whatnot, look like they were just very temporary structures, which is on one hand, like we were saying, with the tribes having it so they can just pick up at a moment's notice, that's kind of good. But then, like, that was definitely a lot of sunk cost. Inputting all that concrete and energy and all that stuff, and it's gone, and there's no fixing it. You just got to bulldoze it and
and now there's more energy to like fucking clear,
get all the shit out of the area. There's a little bit. Okay.
There's a little bit what?
A little bit more to that one.
Okay, yeah. Let's watch this little clip about storage shelves getting emptied.
Yeah, that's right. I forget you can see it.
Isa sa mga kinoconsider natin na possible sources nito ay local fault dito sa area na to. So, Abra River fault. So, yun yung mga fault na somehow baka or posible na naging source nitong lindol na ito. I think ang pinakamalapit is yung Abra River fault. So, yun yung chinecheck pa ngayon po if ever this one is yung parang source niya. Siguro, lagi natin isipin na at least once in our lifetime, makaka-experience tayo ng ganitong klaseng sakuna. Ay, hindi man natin gustuhin, pero posible na mangyari. Hindi naman natin kailangan malaman kung kailan, saan mangyayari, at kung gaano kalakas ito. Basta alam natin na mangyayari ito. Gaano ba tayo kahanda?
Are you ready?
For now.
Yeah. How ready are we for it? And I think that in that region, the answer is not fucking very ready at all.
No, and I mean, I think traditional building in the Philippines was probably with a lot of like thatch roofs and like I don't actually know much about their folk architecture, but like I imagine most like Pacific Islanders used some kind of grasses or palm fronds or whatever to build out their structures. So they were lightweight using plant materials, or wood or whatever.
Yeah.
If
totally
that
unrelated.
Fucking burns down or that falls over, like you're not out much, and the labor to fix it is not much.
Yeah, just make it anew. Totally unrelated to anything. I love the language. It's like Filipino with like a bunch of borrowed Spanish and then English mixed in.
It's a legacy of fucking successive colonization, right?
Pretty much.
They had whatever their indigenous Tagalog, I think, is their native language.
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, it might be some Pacific Islander kind of language group, but with like lots of elements of English and Spanish.
Yeah, and like it seems like I don't have a word for that. I'll just use English. Fuck it. I don't care. Yeah. So I mean, the answer to his question of how prepared are we is not very, and again, we put so much of our energy into things that really don't matter, and here we got like earthquakes and whatnot, that are actually going to kill a whole bunch of people and ruin other lives and all that stuff.
Yeah, what was the death toll on that, by the way?
The last I looked, it was not very much. I think it was
like a couple dozen, right?
Yeah. It was not a whole lot. A lot of people got injured. There were a bunch of pictures of cars that had gotten crushed, like you saw, and I think her name was Eliza. In her house, she had a couple of vehicles that were crushed, which really sucks because even if your house is cheap, like that's a lot of value right there that you are not getting back. You better hope your insurance is good. But like there was another part of it I didn't show. They were showing like a 17th century Spanish building, and just a big hunk of it just fell off and crushed a car. And they're like, thankfully, this guy was off getting lunch at the time of the earthquake. So it couldn't have been lunch. It must have been breakfast. I think it happened at like 8:43 in the morning or something like that. But yeah, he was like, he'd parked his car, near it, gone off to get breakfast, and came back and his car is destroyed. And it's like, that sucks a lot.
And the thing is that like all of this stuff, exactly, like none of it, we're busy like destroying every ecosystem on the fucking planet and turning it over to this industrial killing machine.
Yeah.
And like nature's gonna fucking hit the reset button anyway. Like, why do all of this? And that's not even to mention the disasters, the social and ecological and economic disasters that follow ecosystem destruction. Every single civilization in human history has followed the same trajectory of destroying its resource base, and then its population collapses because ultimately, like, we're not fed by like aeroponics in these like big glass urban farm towers and all this fantasy bullshit. We're fed by fucking soil.
Yeah.
And soil microbes and animals that eat plants.
And history is littered with the skeletons of cities. Just where
100%.
some disaster hit and people are like, maybe this wasn't the answer, and they all go back to their, farms or tribal existences, whatever.
Resettle.
And then of course, 1,000 years later they forget about it, come back. It doesn't even take 1,000. It takes like a couple hundred. Yeah, it's that. And people are like, hey, let's try this idea.
I think
just get everybody in one area.
The Greek Dark Ages was one of the longer Dark Ages. And I think that was several hundred years. It's like 300 or 400 years before enough economic development had been restored to where like you had the art and culture stuff, right?
The
you
US
need a surplus for fucking poets, right? Because everybody's a fucking poet, just most of them are too busy working in the field, right? Like,
well, even the US is littered, like we talk about our ghost towns and whatnot. Like we passed through a couple of them just driving out to Louisiana. Where we built these like purpose-built resource extraction cities, and then as soon as the resource is gone or depleted enough that it's no longer profitable, that city just disappears. You have people that hang on for as long as they can, but ultimately there's nothing there. There's nothing left anymore to make that town necessary, and it disappears.
Yeah, I mean, and you can see it all over the Central Valley too. When like automobile travel was. Even with automobiles, it still took a very long time to travel because the roads weren't built for fast cars. And I don't think they really built all that fast of cars, right? Until the post-war era, right? Like a Model T, I think
it capped out at like 25 miles an hour.
Yeah, I was going to say like early automobile models couldn't drive like 80 miles an hour.
No, God, no.
Even if the road was built for 80 miles an hour, right? The machines were not designed to do that. And my point is that you can see in the Central Valley, there's all these like where there's like a cluster of houses and what looked like it might have been like a mechanic, right? Who could fix tractors and cars. And then there was like a little grocer, right? Like, or market or whatever. And there might be a little diner where you can go get a cup of really shitty fucking coffee before you start your day or whatever, right? And there used to be these little tiny towns and there might be just like 3 or 4 blocks, right? Williams is kind of like that too, like downtown Williams. There's like a couple like gridded out blocks and then like some industrial infrastructure for agriculture, right? Like a depot for loading grain and fruits and shit on trains. And other than that, like those fucking communities died. We built the interstate and all these little tiny communities that used to be, small, but like also had some kind of economic activity there that benefited the people that lived there. All of those are fucking gone because now you just stay on the interstate until you're like, oh, I'm fucking hungry. Oh, let's stop at the Wendy's in Dunnigan, right? Like there's a pilot station there with fucking Wendy's attached to us. Go get a fucking.
We'll go to Denny's or something.
Yeah, or Denny's.
Get a Grand Sandwich.
But anyway, so we just like destroyed communities. So it's not just like old, ghost towns in the Wild West. It's like we're still actively killing them, or towns in coal country, right? Like or towns in the Rust Belt, like where there used to be industrial manufacturing, and due to automation and offshoring and corporate greed, and just an economic system that prioritizes the wealthy over the masses. All those communities are more or less dead. Like Detroit's revival is if it can somehow attract people by cheap real estate. So you get these fucking hipsters that are like, I just need an internet connection because I work from home. And then they're going up there because they can buy a fucking, an old like Victorian or whatever and like fix it up for super cheap and have like a really bitchin' house.
Yeah.
Right. So like gentrification is like kind of one thing that's keeping some cities alive in a roundabout way. But most of them, yeah, they die all the time. Towns die.
I was actually having a discussion with Rachel when we were going to Santa Cruz, I believe it was. We were passing through Los Banos, and she's like, I hate coming through here because it slows down to like 35, and it's these cookie cutter, developments along the road that are just like chop, 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 chop. And she's like, I wish they would just build around it. And I started thinking about it, and I'm like, they would oppose that so hard if they were like, oh, we're going to build an interstate, that just goes around the town or whatever. Like Los Banos would fight that shit tooth and nail to stop it from happening, because they would dry up and become nothing if nobody had to go through them anymore. Mm-hmm. And so like that is also another source is just bypasses, is it the Esplanade? Remember where I had that shitty apartment?
Yeah.
Like used to be a hotel, because that was a major road where a lot of cars came through.
That was Highway 99.
And then they built the Highway 99 proper, and suddenly they turned a whole bunch of stuff that used to be for tourists into shitty little apartments for
tourists and travelers. People. Yeah. And all of that dried up, but it changes. Yeah. And you were mentioning Los Banos and them fighting. Marysville did the same thing. And I think they were successful. I'm not sure. I'd have to double check. Maybe
I still have to drive through, like downtown Marysville in order to get.
But they were trying to build a bypass as part of the 70 improvement, and like pretty much at Marysville is the only place they haven't improved, because it's 4 lanes, with the exception of a 5 or 6 miles that are actively in the process of being widened. Like they've already acquired the easements because the farmer cut down a row of trees he got eminent domain and had to cut a row of trees down so they could widen the highway or whatever. And they've already bulldozed it and all that other stuff. And they moved the utility poles and all these other things, right? So it's in progress. And then it'll be all the way to Marysville. And then on the other side of Marysville, it's 4 lanes until it splits. And then they'd already done the section of 65 and bypassed Lincoln and Wheatland and a couple of those other small communities there. They already did a bypass, so you can get on fucking 65 in Roseville and drive all the way to Marysville without passing through all these little like old farming communities. And yeah, they're drying up too. I mean, that was a big thing when I was in college, was driving through. We'd always stop in fucking Wheatland to probably get gas or cigarettes or just a soda and stop, take a piss or whatever. Now that doesn't happen. You can drive so fucking fast, you miss it. You're like, oh shit, I wanted to stop at Raj's and pick up a fucking gallon of jet fuel, because
if Raj's is even there anymore.
No, Raj's is still there. Okay. I drove by it. Yeah, there's a little coffee kiosk there that's pretty good. I stop it when I travel. I don't travel through there very often, but it's good. Anyway, so we were talking about economic disasters, which is largely what this whole fucking podcast is about, dude. Like, it's just about this slow rolling disaster and decay of civilization, and these kinds of disasters just punctuate it, right? So like I'm thinking of examples, especially in like the Greek Dark Ages, right? Because that's also a very geologically active area, right? Like volcanoes and earthquakes and shit, right? Yep. When a society's ruling class is insulated from the suffering of the poor, and they're too busy trying to make their buddies happy at cocktail parties and having sane economic policy, as we discussed a few weeks back, and all these other things, like if that happens, they just don't fucking, there's no resources. They look and they're like, oh, well we did that, then we'd have to give Raytheon less money or McDonnell Douglas less money. And like, we want to make them happy because, they have a factory in this, community
little town that I represent
in my district that like gives me lots of votes, and like it's just so fucking corrupt. They can't respond to disasters like this in years, because they still haven't fucking fixed New Orleans after Katrina, and their fix there was to close the fucking public housing and turn it into fucking luxury condos. Just like their solution here after the Camp Fire was to outlaw single wide trailers, which made up a significant portion of the affordable housing in Paradise.
I read about that.
And now you have to have a minimum of, I think it's like 1,100 square foot single family home. I don't know if they've restored mobile home parks. I don't know all of the details, and I don't want to say I do, but I know that they made it more difficult to build cheap housing after cheap housing was wiped out, which seems counterintuitive, but it's because they're out of fucking touch. And so whether you lived in New Orleans and you never went back, or you lived in parts of Houston where your apartment building got fucking obliterated by floodwater, and your landlord's just like, nah, I just took the insurance money. I don't really fucking want it anymore. Right?
Mhm.
Like, and you're like, but where do I
Well,
I don't
need to live.
find another place to live.
Yeah.
Because I'm not obligated to house you, because housing is not a human right. And so let's talk about
It is,
Kentucky a
and
bit.
it actually is. And America signed on to that. We just don't do it. And who's going to enforce it? Because we're fucking America and we'll blow you up.
Yeah.
It's basically what it amounts to. You know, we signed into like, you know, agreements that like straight
Declaration of Human Rights.
outline. That outline that it is a human right. And we're just like, nah, fuck that. That sounds like work, and capitalism does not support that. But yeah, so just in case everyone thought they were safe if you didn't live on a coast, you're not.
You're not.
You're absolutely not.
Eastern Kentucky is the epicenter tonight of the nation's latest extreme weather disaster. At least 16 people have died in flooding that rewrote the record books and ravaged neighboring states as well. Amna Nawaz has our report.
The town of Garrett, Kentucky is hardly recognizable, inundated by torrents of rainwater that flooded streets and wiped out homes and businesses. Rachel Patton was caught in the deluge.
Everything's gone, like everything is gone. The whole life is gone.
Her mother also had to be rescued.
We had to put her on a door to get her out of her trailer because she was flooded in. She couldn't get out. She's on oxygen.
Search and rescue teams backed by the National Guard are still searching for missing people. But determining the exact number of missing has been a challenge, as many people were stranded without cellular service, and many are in areas still inaccessible to the crews.
We know we've got folks now that we can't get to, they've got water in their homes and they're trapped, and we just can't get to them because the water is so swift.
The historic floods struck in some of the state's smallest and poorest areas. As much as a foot of rain has fallen in eastern Kentucky in the last week, in counties near the borders with Virginia and West Virginia. By this morning, more than 33,000 people had no power, and many also lost water service.
Hello, everybody.
Today, Kentucky's Governor Andy Beshear prepared his state for more grim days ahead.
Right now, looks like it's going to rain a lot Monday, maybe Tuesday. So we will continue to watch that. But everybody out there, have a safety plan for when that comes. We don't want you to have to go through this twice.
In the meantime, the rescue effort goes on around the clock. Beshear predicted the damage will take at least a year to rebuild. Meanwhile, a similar story in parts of western Virginia and southern West Virginia, where flooding overtook roads and brought down trees, leading both governors to issue emergency declarations in the hardest hit areas. And more rainfall in St. Louis last night and into today, just days after a storm topped the daily rainfall record set back in 1915.
Our boat has arrived, Mary.
This mother and her 9-month-old daughter had to be rescued from their home and pulled through what was once their neighborhood in Hazelwood, Missouri. The Missouri Department of Transportation closed down 4 highways as well as several other roads.
I could drive across that, no problem.
President Biden declared the situation a major disaster, ordering federal aid to 13 counties that will assist in recovery efforts.
Our hearts break for the families of those who have lost their lives or are missing, and to all those who have been impacted. Unfortunately, Kentucky is no stranger to catastrophic climate events, and the federal government will continue to provide assistance.
More rain and storms are expected to continue into the weekend. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Amna Nawaz.
Yeah. So I'm reminded of, I think it was 2 summers ago. Do you remember in Germany something similar happened? And there was also communities in Appalachia that this happened to just like fucking a couple years ago, where like it dropped a bunch of rain in it because that's where the fresh water is, where presumably the fish is, and also sometimes where you can get easier transport, right, on a river. You can have mule teams pull things upriver and move a lot more goods for less expense, right? And I remember just a number of years ago, similar to this, where it's like a deluge, like in the uplands, these small communities along the river had no fucking idea the river was going to like bank to bank, like, 30 feet higher than it was. Like,
Yeah.
it was devastated. And in Germany, there was something similar where there was just like these freak rainstorms, and these communities built like in these canyons, and it just big old fucking wall of water just washes everything out. And I mean, this is climate change, right? Like part of it, and part of it is just like, they said the record was set in 1915. How destructive was that? Probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure probably some cattle, right? The last time we had a major like arc event here was in 1860s or whatever, and it killed it remade the state in the terms of it used to be a cattle-based economy, and there were so many dead cattle that it provided an opportunity to reset. And I don't know if the government made them whole, because that was in the 1860s. The federal government had was still actively fighting a fucking civil war, and or just finished fighting a civil war, right? Like, so they probably didn't have they owed the banks money for the weapons and the soldier doctor bills and shit, not for cattle in California, literally a world away at that time. There was no transcontinental railroad or anything.
No, that didn't come till another 20, 30 years later. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So like, the federal government wouldn't have responded to that, right? Like, all that cattle gone, that's when a lot of people shifted to farming, because like fucking cattle is not just like a thing that you get value from because it eats grass and then you eat beef. The cattle's a store of value because cattle breed. So you eat the babies, kind of like
veal is so good.
No, I was going to say that it's not important. There's that episode of Rick and Morty where they find out little King Tommy and all that stuff. Just having babies.
Oh, yeah. Having the baby. Yeah. So yeah, it's like framed as a natural disaster, but at the same time, like, how much of it, could be prevented if everything wasn't paved over, and some of the water could have, actually soaked into the ground or something like that. Like, plants will soak up a lot of fucking water,
and healthy forests, right?
Yeah.
Like the 1915, most of that would have probably at that point been carved up into farmland, but like less pavement for sure.
Yeah.
Right. And perhaps like soils that, even if they had cleared forest for farms, like
just probably
still had good organic matter.
Yeah. I mean, just like trees and grasses, man. That's all it takes. Slows the water down, absorbs some of it. Like in the initial stages of a downpour, it helps to absorb some of the water. In the later stages, it helps to slow that water down once you actually get water flowing. Like, there's so much that you could do just by not having black tar mixed with rock everywhere. But hey, we gotta drive our cars.
All right. Well, I think that is it, unless you have another clip.
Nope, that was the last one. I just wanted to make people, away from the coast also feel unsafe.
Well, climate disasters are going to keep happening, and there's really no way to prep it. I mean, the preparations you can do are like to study and find out like what the general trend is going to be, and then be prepared for cataclysms, right? Like, another thing for Northern California that a lot of people are unaware of is that, like, we are at the southern tip of the Ring of Fire, right? Like, because of that Juan de Fuca plate, the same one that causes the earthquake and tsunami threats, right? And so we have Mount Canocti, which is in like not far from the Bay Area. In fact, the wine country here, Napa and Sonoma Valleys, grow such great grapes because they're fucking volcanic soils. Because there's a fucking volcano like right there, right? And then we have Lassen and we have Shasta.
Yup, that's what I was just looking up.
And Lassen, most of the park there, I think it's called a caldera. It's when like a volcano basically explodes
and it causes the
There's one of those, and that used to be the mountain. And then Lassen was formed through, magma piling up essentially after that one fucking exploded.
Yeah, which is only, it says it was 100 years ago, little around there. So it's still considered to be active.
Oh no, they're all very active.
Yeah.
Active in geologic terms, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not like Hawaii where you're like the earth shakes and then there might be some venting of magma like
all
every
the time.
few years or whatever. It's not that active, but in terms of like volcano, it's not a dead volcano. It's still very much alive. And there's geologic formations near Mount Shasta that are the same, that are like, oh, these are literally formed by volcanism.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 3 of those, and like you wouldn't have to worry about like lava flows kind of in the same way, or like vents opening up and having sinkholes just fucking appear. Like unless you were very close. Like for our communities, the issue is just going to be fucking ash, right?
Right.
We're pretty far from those, but also say that shit happens in the spring, right? And then the sky is blacked out for 2 months. Well, you don't get much of a crop if you lose half your fucking growing season to a sky filled with ash, right? And then acid rain, right? Because that fills the sky with sulfur and shit. And so you have like these kinds of cascading things that matter, even if you're not directly under threat from magma flows. You know what I mean? And that shit can throw fucking rock like hundreds of miles. So like, there could be a potential risk there. You're just like
pyroclastics,
and all of a sudden the hole gets punched through your fucking roof. Right? Like, I don't know, but like there's just so many. It's impossible to prepare for all of them. So just have a basic plan in place. Maybe we can discuss that in the future. As I learn more, I'm supposed to take as part of my advanced permaculture diploma a class on disasters. Some of it's going to have like bioremediation and other kinds of things like that. But some of it is like actual disaster preparedness, like
bug out bag 101.
Yeah, and not just how to build a bug out bag, but also assessing your vulnerability, right? So part of this conversation, we're like, oh, there's 3 active volcanoes in and around Northern California.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's this fucking fault line, and there is some tsunami risk along the coast. A lot less so lower in the state than the North Pacific Northwest corner, the Redwood Coast, does have some tsunami risk. Generally, they're not bad because most of the communities are built up inside bays. I think there was one in Crescent City, like in the 80s, and it wasn't very big. It destroyed like the first couple blocks of the town, right? But not Crescent City's a tiny town, and so it wasn't super catastrophic. I don't think anybody died because there's a warning system in place. So like, air raid siren kind of type system. It says, oh shit, there was just an earthquake off the coast. Like you should probably go inland,
get higher up.
get to high ground. But we could just plan for that and build fucking tsunami tech. How much would it cost to build that?
I can't imagine very much. I mean, the plans they showed in that one video, it looked like it was a, concrete and steel structure. So, I mean, automatically that adds a bunch of cost to it. But much, it looked like it was the size of a parking garage.
Exactly. And you're only talking about being able to have a few hundred people and then some supplies. Like, and that would be the greatest part about it too, is that you could fucking stash supplies there and shit. So that like you just have like a community resource that in the event of a fire, you go to the fire bunker and there's food there in case something happens, like there's a fire, a really bad fire, the roads buckle, or there's a bad fire and then it fucking rains a bunch. Because sometimes the dry lightning will start a fire and then it'll fucking rain like the next day or later that day. And so if it burns through and then a heavy rain and causes mudslides and shit, a community like Cohasset could be trapped for fucking weeks.
Oh yeah. I mean,
for weeks.
Dangerous place to live.
Yeah, I would never I considered looking for a house there. I didn't want.
I remember you talked about it. Yeah.
I didn't want the commute, but like also like, nah, bro. Like I don't want to drive a windy ass road all the time. And like this place is a fucking tinderbox, bro. Like, it's a tinderbox. There's just like old people, a lot of older people. that just can't physically care for it or just don't have the desire or inclination. They just fucking hang out and watch TV or whatever. Like, and it's a lot of land and it's kind of one of those things. If you have a bunch of land, it's like you have to be able to care for it. And we don't have a system in place, and we don't foster a culture of doing that, because there are lots of people who need work and also need a place to stay. I don't see why you couldn't have just fucking camps where people could spend their summer camping in the mountains and doing this work. I went, I don't know if we talked about it on last check-in, but we went to the High Sierra to camp late July, so a number of weeks ago now. And I'm just like walking around, and that's Stanislaus National Forest, so that's federal forest, right? And I'm just looking at it, and I'm like, bro, if you had like just set up a fucking camp and provided, basic fucking infrastructure, especially supply drop, right? And ice, or even better, you can maybe do like a propane powered refrigerator or something, right? Yeah. Something just to at least keep the beer cold and the milk, but the beer, right? But you could have I'm sure there are young men and women that would love to come together for a month or two camping. Yeah. But it's a work camp. So they go there, they have their needs met, and they're getting a salary for it, right? The government is saying, we will pay you X amount of dollars or for the summer. And it's just like a summer stipend. You can use it as experience on your resume. You get incentives for school. You could couple it with the university so they can get credit. So your students getting natural resource management degrees or forestry degrees or all that have practical fucking experience, like doing hard work. So they're not just this like bureaucrat that's like, oh, I don't know, I got appointed here from this assignment. Yeah. You have no fucking experience. No, I was just in the agency from, I came from the Ag Bureau, and now I'm in the USDA and I'm in charge of forestry policy because that's where they had the promotion slot, and my annual reviews looked good enough for a promotion.
So I have two thoughts.
Well, go ahead. Sorry, man.
One good, one bad.
No.
The first one, I'll start with a good one, is you could also use the military for things like this.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
We've got a massive standing military. Why not use the military? Yep. The second one, which is terrible, is we could use prisoners for it. We already use them to fight fire. Why not use them to prevent fire?
No, I don't disagree with that either.
But it's
think that can be done.
I think we both know it.
If they're compented, right?
Yeah.
The problem with prison labor is that they're like, oh, we don't have to pay you.
It's the last remaining vestige of slave labor. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, 100%, right?
Yeah.
But you're right. But also, you could do it like AmeriCorps type or conservation. Expand the conservation.
Yeah, yeah.
Or like you said, the standing military, and that really
they're not doing anything most of the time. I know. I was in it.
I know.
We both were just sitting around doing nothing most of the time,
twiddling their thumbs, getting fucking wasted, getting really drunk a lot,
getting wasted and trying to get STDs.
Not me. I was married while I was in the military. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Especially for many young men and women. But you're right. I think that like there's so much forest that needs like attention, and like they're like, my cousin just stayed here with like a bunch of friends who are like backpacking, not friends, trail friends. Like she's like, oh, we just met this guy yesterday. Okay, cool. Right? Like, oh, we're passing through your area. Can we crash at your house and take showers and wash some laundry? Fuck yeah, you can. Hang out and, they watched a movie and we had some waffles for breakfast. And it was nice. So my point is that like those people just want to like be out and do adventures and shit. They might want to continue to be mobile, but they're kind of like not rooted, right? Like they're just like, oh, where do you want to go? When they're gonna go out to the Oregon coast and hike up like to the Washington border from like Eureka, California. You're gonna fucking walk to Washington, right? Cool, more power to you. They've already done, like one of the guys had already done 1,200 miles because he started at the Mexico border. Yeah, and it's just what they're into, right? Yeah. But then they're like, oh, when we finish the Oregon Coast Trail, where do you want to go? Oh, I don't know. Let's go to Chile. So these people don't have
roots at all.
No roots.
Yeah.
And this is what they want to do, is just travel and fucking backpack and shit and have experiences, and more power to them.
Oh yeah.
There are lots of people like that would have loved to just been given space and the resources to live in the woods, even if it required of them to do work.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah. I mean, I'm fucking done with offices and shit like that. You know, if I had, if you told me like, oh yeah, go work the land, you know, when I was younger, and you'll be rewarded for it, it would have been like, yeah, cool, yay.
Right.
As long as I got some like satellite internet.
Yeah, of course. So anyway, we're done talking about this. I mean, we're never going to be done talking about disasters, but I think that the point is that like we could build tsunami towers, we could build fire bunkers, we could pay people to reduce fuel loads and restore the health of the forest so that its hydrology functions and so that it's not as prone to catastrophic fire.
Right.
We could plan through county code and otherwise to provide buffers and or mitigate certain hazards, but we have a system that just serves money. So it's never going to have that kind of forward thinking. And as close to we've gotten on that is like earthquake building standards and now like fire building standards, right?
Yeah.
You don't actually have conscious community planning with community democratic input in the planning process. You have money buys position appoints money to the board that oversees building codes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so they're doing whatever they need to do to make the most profit in their, you know, in their business, not what's best for the community. And we don't have democratic planning. So like, there's no way to have a conversation. I had a friend that ran for town council in Paradise on a fucking platform of making the town safer because he was terrified of a fire, and he lost that election. Fucking, I think the election was on the 6th of November. The campfire was on the 8th. But he lost the election. Why? Because he wasn't friends with the Chamber of Commerce, because he didn't have a business and wasn't a member of the chamber. But he was like, his whole campaign was like we need to do something, and here's my vision. I want to make a park so that we can bike and hike and ride horses all the way around the town, and we're gonna do in these sectors here. And like he called me and was like, what should we do? I was like, oh man, planning the building code to like start moving rainwater into like rain, like basically like where it's possible, move stormwater into retention areas so it stays hydrated longer.
Right.
Like, and plan for, just use that as a barrier. You have a big, beautiful park and a bunch of stormwater gets directed there and soaks in so it stays moisture longer. Those trees are not dying off from drought and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you maintain it, right?
That's the unsexy part.
Yeah, but there's lots of people that need work. The problem is it's cheaper for it's more profitable for the developers to rebuild houses than it is to fucking protect them. And we're all just the meat that gets tossed back and forth as these fuckers feed at the trough that the government teat. So, yeah, it's just a corrupt system, and it could all be better, but it won't, because that's not how societies manage complex situations.
We just don't have enough guillotines. That's all there is.
Yeah.
A few more of those.
Guillotines. What was the other one we were talking about? Whipping post with the four wet
yeah. Public shaming and execution of people that lead to these horrible situations.
It'll come to that, but they won't be the ones getting executed. We will.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what they do. They get rid of the pores. I was explaining that to my kids because we were talking about Purge from the game. And Brooke mentioned the movies and all this, and I mentioned the Rick and Morty episode, which is a really good one.
Just watch that one.
It's a fucking good one. And I was kind of explaining to Sophia, my eldest daughter, I was like, well, it's basically the idea is that there's only so much resources to go around. And so as the pie shrinks, the rich still want to keep their their by volume or weight, their piece, and don't want to get, so you have to figure out some other way. And it's either you can take from the rich and redistribute so it's more equal, you can suffer the consequences of social unrest, of inequality, or you can just kill poor people. And that's what our system prefers to do. That's why we have people dying on the street of fucking heat stroke and dying, of cold injury, because there's no housing or shelter. And
even just sending people off to war,
the surplus population, than actually fucking deal with the problem, because fewer people means more resources for the rich.
Yeah,
that is it. And that's basically the moral of every podcast episode we do.
Sad.
Eat the rich. Compost the rich.
Ooh, yeah.
All right, man. It's been fun. And guess what?
What? Robot?
I was never a robot, I don't think.
No. What are you talking about? I can't see all of you. R2D2?
No. I was saying I wasn't a robot. I think that the fucking cable they replaced was the whole issue.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yep.
That's
true. No, not at all.
We
Everything
fixed
was
the
fine.
problem. Now the quality of the show will begin to improve. Because
now we can focus
the cable
on
guy
things
replaced like 80 feet of fucking coax outside of his house.
Now I can get like a scrolling bar along the bottom that
a little ticker
has information. A little ticker there.
A douchebag. He doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. Don't listen to him.
If you hear me typing, you'll know what I'm doing.
All right, man. It's almost 5, and I just realized I was getting really fucking hungry.
Me too.
I'm gonna go do that, and then I'm gonna hunt some barbs.
All right, man. Enjoy your.
Thank you for watching. This has been With Thunderous Applause, a podcast where we talked about disasters, how you're not safe away from the coast, how you can't really plan for it, how the rich will always exploit those disasters, and disaster capitalism will always find a way to enrich itself, and the rest of us get fucked. I think that was
Thunderous
about
applause.
it. With Thunderous Applause. Because when liberty dies, it dies with
thunderous applause.
All right, see you, buddy.
Wait a minute.
Bye.